I'm so glad you are excited to learn more math. This chapter is the next chapter. This deals with decimals. I know we haven't finished chapter 8 yet. That'll be ongoing over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to do these ones a little bit different than the ones for the regular lesson, only because these are purely just to learn things. So follow along. There are slideshows, slide documents where you can do the problems. I am going to recommend that for both for the front of this paper and the back of this one for now, that the idea is to see what you do know, as it says right on there, show what you know. So right now, for just on the front, go ahead, pause the video that I know you just started, and go ahead and try some of these problems. And then once you have them done, you can come back and see if you got them right and make sure you have what you need to be successful in this chapter. All right, so I will leave this up here just for a moment in case you need to use this one. All right, so it says count coins, find the total value. I know that is a little hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit anyway. Not sure that makes it any easier. We refocus a little bit. That doesn't help so much. But since I can see it, we're going to assume that that first coin there is a quarter plus 3 nickels and 2 pennies. So a quarter is 25, 30, 35, 40. So this is 42 cents. Now, as we move into this lesson, I will tell you right now, we're not going to write cents in this way. So we want to get in the habit now of writing cents just like we would as if it were a dollar. The 0 is optional. You don't have to put the 0 in, but we would definitely want our 0.42 as our way of saying cents, even though 42 with the cent sign is appropriate. Just this chapter is getting into decimals, so we want to start using decimals. Okay, so the total value here, it appears we have 2 quarters, so that's 50 cents. A dime takes us to 60, a nickel, 65, 66, 67 cents. So again, I'm going to put 0.67 and I'll put my dollar sign out front. And the dollar sign always goes out front, even though we don't always say it that way. I know, it's weird. Welcome to how we decide things. All right, write 2 equivalent fractions for the picture. Hopefully you caught that it asked for 2. So I'm just going to look at this. So offhand, I could see easily that that's 3/4. And one way I can make my equivalent fraction is to multiply both the top and the bottom by the same number. So I can also get 6/8, which would make sense because if I actually divided this into 8 pieces, I would still have 6 of them. Over here, if I count up, I have 4/6. Now this one, you could do the same thing. You could multiply by a number to get another fraction. You could also divide both the top and bottom by the same number. And in that case, I get 2/3. So if I were to imagine that each of these columns was each one group, I have 2 of them. Again, for this one, if you had 8/12, that's fine. If you multiply by 10, had 40/60, that's fine. Okay, lots of right answers for that. Okay, now, this next section should be okay. Don't get crazy thinking about decimals yet. So it says, write a fraction for the words. You may draw a picture. May means you don't have to. So, all right, 3/10. Yes, this is literally what they want you to just write is 3/10. 8/10 looks like that. 6/10 and 9/10. Hopefully you were able to do that. That's pretty straightforward. Now, this last question down here says the Hudson River, let's see if I can get it where you can see it. The Hudson River Science Barge, docked near New York City, provides a demonstration of how renewable energy can be used to produce food for large cities. Vegetables grown on the barge require blank of the water needed by field crops. Be a math detective. Use these clues to find the fraction and decimal for the missing amount. All right, so it says the number is less than 1 and has 2 decimal places. The digit in the hundredth place has a value of 5/100ths. The digit in the tenths place has a value of 2/10ths. So if you remember back in the beginning of March before we went our separate ways, we actually had talked about some basic stuff with regard to writing down some fractions as decimals, and we were talking about how to do some of that. So if you remember, and I'm sorry, that glare is terrible. As I'm trying to write on a, maybe if I move it, okay, it's a little better. Trying to write on a dry erase or just a plastic sleeve so that we can still see the words. All right, so if my decimal has 2 decimal places, in fact, I'm going to erase this stuff up here. I'm going to write up top here. So I know it's a decimal point and 2 decimal places. Then it tells me the hundredth place is worth 5/100ths. And if you remember when we talked about these, we went tenths came first, then hundredths, then thousandths, and on and on. So 5 in my hundredths place, 2 in my tenths place. So it would require, so it wants me to write the fraction and decimal. Okay, well, the decimal is easy. Decimal is 0.25. We got that. But now, what is that as a fraction? And remember, we did talk about this real briefly before. I want to look at the place value that my last digit is in. So in this case, the 5 is in the hundredth place. So if I were going to say this as a decimal, I would say 25/100ths. Well, that sounds a lot like a fraction. And that is exactly how we write it. 25/100ths. All right, so that's kind of some of the basic info you need to make sure you can do as we move into this chapter. Next, I do want to go to the next page, which is kind of dealing with some of the vocabulary and things that you are going to need to know for this chapter. All right, so they give us some, oh, you can't see that. Let me zoom out a little bit here. Move this down. All right. So it says complete the semantic map by using words with a check mark. Well, that's very nice. They even tell us what words to use. So we have compare, whole, hundredth, and tenth. So if we look at those, well, if I were to say this very first fraction right here, that looks like it says 1/10. So this would be tenth. If I look down here, I have 1/100th. So this one is hundredth. Put these back. This is just the number 1. So that would be what we consider a whole with a W, not a hole in the ground. And then this thing, it says 1/10 is greater than 1/100th. Well, that sounds a lot like they are comparing them. All right. So now we have a handful of words and definitions. It says we have decimal, decimal point, tenth, hundredth, and equivalent decimals. So, oops, let's see, move the wrong thing here. All right. So 2 or more decimals that name the same amount. Well, that clue there would be same. So that would be equivalent decimals. 1 part out of 100 equal parts. So 1 out of 100 would be 1/100th. A number with one or more digits to the right of the decimal point. That is what we officially call a decimal. 1 part out of an equal 10 parts would be 1/10. And a symbol used to separate dollars from cents in money amounts and to separate the ones and tenths places in decimals. Well, that would be the decimal point. So just a other quick review on this. Let me pause the video sheet for a second. Let me erase this. And just a quick review of if this is my decimal point, on the left side, we have ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. It keeps on going the same way it did back when, why is that out of focus? The same way it did back when we did whole numbers and like what you're used to. Then, if you remember, we kind of put the ones and the decimal point in a little box and called it a mirror, because then when we go the other direction, and I'll put some lines here so we get tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So they go in the same order, except for there is the ones kind of join in with our decimal point. Now, does anyone remember how we say that decimal point? The decimal point has a name when we pronounce it. Hopefully you remembered. Whenever we come to that decimal point and we need to say it, his name is and. So if I had 4.25, the correct way to say that would be 4 and 25 hundredths, because my 5 is in the hundredths place. So we'll try to remember that a little bit as we go through this and see if we can make some sense out of this. All right, so I'm going to end this video right there. I will pick up again. There's another video that will be for section 1, and we'll go from there. But this was just a little review to make sure you are ready for this. So come back, watch the next video.